5:30 in the morning, getting up to get the ferry, and because we've got to move the car. But the seagulls have got us up anyway.
If a place is mentioned in the Domesday Book, it is at least 1,000 years old. There are 13,000 such places and Dartmouth is one of them. The book records it was held by Walter of Douai, a Norman knight. It paid tax on half a hide, a term for the area of land, and had 2 plough teams, 2 slaves, 5 villagers and 4 smallholders. There were 6 cattle, 40 sheep and 15 goats. As its name suggests, Dartmouth is located at the mouth of the River Dart. Despite its still relatively small size, Dartmouth drips with history and significance. It has been home to the Royal Navy and a base for privateering. Privateering is a general term that can probably be best defined as state-authorised piracy. Between the 15 and 1800s, privately owned and operated ships were allowed to capture and take possession of any other vessel operated by an enemy nation. Despite periods of it not being allowed, the rewards and benefit for the state prevailed. Privateers supported the Royal Navy. During the time of global colonisation, they protected British interests at sea and thwarted the efforts of competing nations. The original most famous and flamboyant privateers were Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake. It is reputed Queen Elizabeth I loved them for both their wealth generation and daring recklessness. These raiders of the oceans were known as sea dogs. Dartmouth sent numerous ships to join the English fleet that attacked the Spanish Armada. The Spanish Armada's pay ship, the Nuestra Senora del Rociero, was captured along with all its crew by Sir Francis Drake. It was reportedly anchored in the River Dart for more than a year, and the crew were used as labourers. In 1592, the Madre de Deus, a Portuguese treasure ship, was captured by the English in the Azores and brought to Dartmouth. It attracted all manner of traders, dealers, cut-purses and thieves, and by the time Sir Walter Raleigh arrived to reclaim the Crown's share of the loot, a cargo estimated at £500,000 had been reduced to £140,000. Still, 10 freighters were needed to carry the treasure to London. In the latter part of the Second World War, the town was a base for American forces and one of the departure points for Utah Beach in the D-Day landings. Britannia Royal Naval College, commonly known as Dartmouth, is the Naval Academy of the United Kingdom and the initial officer training establishment of the Royal Navy. It is located on a hill overlooking the port. In the last episode, I mentioned the successful invasion of England in 1066 by William of Normandy. Having defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings, William forensically set about securing his power. He swept aside the kingdoms established by the Angles, Saxons, Jutes and Celts and divided the country into the many more regions we now know as our counties. He gave these regions to his allies to rule. But he wanted even more control. You've probably heard of the Domesday Book. William set about the huge, unprecedented task of recording and auditing every nook and cranny of the nation. He wanted to know who owned what and how much money they had to work out how much he could tax them. Interestingly, London was not surveyed. Make of that what you will. 1,000 years ago, he knew that knowledge is power and was not troubled by his desire to use it. The data gathered was clearly seen as valuable. At one time it was kept in a large ironclad chest and reinforced with iron straps. The chest had 3 different locks, the keys to which were divided between 3 different officials so that it could only be opened by consent of all 3. The Domesday Book was completed in 1086 and was the most detailed account of life in England until the first national census was carried out in 1801. Nicknamed the Domesday Book by the native English after God's final day of judgment, when every soul would be assessed and against which there could be no appeal, this title was eventually adopted by its official custodians.
With a strong fishing tradition dating back to the 14th century, Brixham is credited with being one of the birthplaces of trawling. In the 19th century, it was recorded that Brixham had 270 sail-operated decked trawlers employing 1,600 seamen, making it the largest fishery in England. The current fleet fish mainly in the English Channel, but also operate in waters as far afield as the Bristol Channel and the Irish Sea. There are 40 different species of fish, with the main catches consisting of cuttlefish, lemon and Dover sole, squid, monkfish and turbot. Built in around 1736, Brixham boasts what is believed to be the world's only coffin-shaped house. The story goes that its unusual design results from an argument between a father and his prospective son-in-law. Upon being asked for his daughter's hand in marriage, the father answered, "I would rather see my daughter in a coffin than married to you." Not to be so easily discouraged, the prospective husband promised that the father's wishes would be met, and built the coffin-shaped house, his action so impressing the bride's father that the latter gave his blessing to the marriage. With Brixham and Torquay either end, Paignton sits in the middle of Torbay. The Torbay area is known as the English Riviera, although I'm not sure if Saint-Tropez, Nice or Monaco would agree. Paignton relies almost exclusively on tourism.
The View Cinema on the right was originally built as the Festival Theatre in 1967 and was once Paignton's main theatre, staging large summer shows. These shows were commonplace in English seaside resorts, offering family entertainment. Big names in British television at the time, such as Tom O'Connor, Freddie Starr, Danny LaRue, Les Dawson, Tommy Still, Leslie Crowther and Bradley Walsh, performed and presented shows here and around the country. Here, you can perhaps appreciate the prominence and significance of what was the Festival Theatre, as it commands pride of place on the beachfront. Its closure in 1998 is a sad reflection of the decline of the heyday of seaside resorts. I'm not worried about it.
The Paignton Picture House was opened in March 1914 and is believed to be the oldest surviving purpose-built cinema in Europe. Unfortunately, the cinema closed down in 1999. Seat 2, Row 2, of the Circle was the favourite seat of locally born crime novelist Agatha Christie. The cinemas and theatres in her books are all said to be based on the Paint and Picture House. It was also used as a location for the 1984 Donald Sutherland film Ordeal by Innocence and the 1981 film The French Lieutenant's Woman, which was filmed mainly at Lyme Regis in Dorset, that we will visit in just a few episodes' time.
As with most English coastal towns, Torquay started as a fishing village, but during the Victorian era emerged as one of England's premier coastal resorts, perhaps not as well known as Brighton or Blackpool, but arguably regarded as more sophisticated. If a comparison is appropriate, Torquay is the English Riviera's Monaco. During World War II, in the months leading up to D-Day, Torquay was home to thousands of US Army personnel, mainly billeted in Charleston and Cockington. Others stayed with local families. The US infantry's actions during and after D-Day are well documented and rightly honoured in writing and film, but they were the tip of a long spear. We shouldn't forget the troops that supported and, in many cases, faced the same dangers as those brave frontline soldiers. Torquay hosted such troops. They included the 618th Ordnance Ammunition Company, the 6th Amphibious Engineers, the 257th Ordnance Medium Maintenance Company, the 31st Chemical Corps, part of the 6th Engineer Special Brigade, and the 3204th Quartermaster Service Company. During Operation Overlord, the proper name for D-Day, more than 23,000 men of the American 4th Infantry Division departed Torquay for Utah Beach. The loading ramps used by the American Army are still visible in front of the Regina Hotel on Vaughan Parade. In the early 1970s, cast members of Monty Python's Flying Circus stayed at the Gleneagles Hotel in Torquay for a planned 3 weeks, while filming in Paynton. Due to the manager's rudeness towards them, which included criticising Terry Gilliam's Too American table etiquette and tossing Eric Idle's briefcase out of a window in case it contained a bomb, the cast left the hotel. Apart from John Cleese and his wife, Connie Booth, Cleese described the manager as the most marvellously rude man I've ever met, and based his Basil Fawlty character on him when he and Booth created Fawlty Towers 5 years later. In my humble opinion, it's probably the best sitcom ever made, although The Office comes close. That's the British Office, not the American.
In July 1690, Teignmouth was attacked by a French raiding party. After examining credible persons, the justice of the peace concluded that, by the late horrid invasion, there were within the space of 12 houses burnt down and consumed 116 dwelling houses, and also 172 dwelling houses were rifled and plundered, and 2 parish churches much ruined, plundered and defaced, besides the burning of 10 sail of ships, with the furniture thereof, and the goods and merchandise therein. Like Dartmouth and many other West Country ports, privateering was common in Teignmouth. You can only imagine the atmosphere in the town when they returned from their swashbuckling escapades at sea, with some foreign vessel in tow with its poor captured crew. In 1779, a recruitment advertisement for crew read as follows: "All gentlemen seamen and able landmen who delight in the music of great guns and distressing the enemies of Great Britain have now a fine opportunity of making their fortunes by entering on board the Dragon privateer, now ready to be launched in the harbour of Teignmouth. Any persons capable of beating a drum or blowing a French horn shall have great encouragement." The Dragon was one of 2 privateers in the town, and had 16 guns and 70 men. The other was the Bellona, described as carrying 16 guns, 4 cahoons, and 8 swivels, whatever they are. In the same year, the captured French ship L'Emulation, with a cargo of sugar, coffee and cotton, were offered for sale at Rendell's great sale room in the town. The taverns, pubs and inns must have been heaving with activity and constantly on a knife edge of playfulness and hostility. Dawlish is probably best known for its black swans, introduced from Western Australia, which live with other exotic waterfowl in a small urban sanctuary on Dawlish Water.
You might not be surprised to hear my favourite form of transport is the motorcycle, but I have to admit there's a much better way to travel the route between Teignmouth and Starcross: by train. Completed in 1847, it is one of Britain's best railway journeys. Simply take a look at a map and you'll see why. It tracks the coast, and on any day, but on particularly fine days, the view and experience is spectacular. Equally satisfying is admiring the engineering of this line, built by the legendary Isambard Kingdom Brunel. In a future adventure, we will see a lot of examples of his engineering genius. Often described as ahead of his time, the original design of the South Devon Railway is no exception in 2 ways. Firstly, it was built in broad gauge, with rails of 7.25 inches apart, as was all of Brunel's main lines, most notably the Great Western Railway. Others opted for a narrower gauge of 4 foot 8.5 inches, that in the long run prevailed. It's generally accepted, had we adopted the broad gauge as standard, the railways would be better for it today. Because Britain led the Industrial Revolution, most countries adopted the narrower gauge, or something close to it. Secondly, rather than have locomotives pulling the carriages or trucks, the atmospheric system was adopted. The train was propelled, or more accurately drawn, by suction. A large pipe was laid between the rails. Engines placed at intervals of about 3 miles drew air from the pipe, creating a vacuum. A single piston suspended underneath the train sat snugly in the pipe and was literally sucked by the difference in air pressure, thus propelling the train along the line. The biggest flaw with the idea was the slot that was needed along the entire length of the pipe to accommodate the arm the piston was suspended on. Leather flaps were used to try to create a seal that maintained the vacuum. The section between Exeter and Teignmouth ran atmospherically for a year, but in 1848 had to be abandoned because of the inefficiencies and technical difficulties. It was a disaster. In front of us now you can see one of the original engine houses for the atmospheric railway. These rare occasions when Brunel got it wrong weren't easily forgiven at the time, let alone accepted as inevitable and necessary risk of the benefits of his genius. In recent years, Brunel was almost voted the greatest Briton of all time, only coming second to Winston Churchill.
We leave Teignmouth and Dawlish behind and make our way inland alongside the River Exe. There is a ferry which crosses the river, but it is a passenger ferry. So we enjoy the 20-mile ride alongside the estuary to get to Exmouth. Exmouth is another seaside gem and gateway to our World Heritage Jurassic Coast. Join us next time to find out more.